What if the most important clues were hidden not out in the open, but waiting silently in the dark for 20 years? The mystery of the Miller twins is far from what anyone could have ever imagined. To follow the trail of the diary and uncover the final, heartbreaking truth, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications on. You won't want to miss the conclusion. The sun hung low and heavy in the late afternoon sky, casting long, lazy shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns of Maple Street. It was the kind of summer day that seemed to last forever, a perfect snapshot of 1985. The air hummed with the distant, cheerful noise of children at play, the smack of a jump rope on pavement, the triumphant shout from a game of tag, the steady whir of bicycle wheels spinning on hot asphalt. For the residents of this quiet suburban enclave, it was just another Tuesday, a thread in the comfortable fabric of their lives. At the end of the cul-de-sac, two identical boys with sun-bleached hair pedaled their red bicycles in easy unison. Ethan and Alex Miller were 8 years old, two halves of a whole, connected by that silent language known only to twins. Their laughter, bright and clear, carried on the warm breeze as they raced each other home, their backpacks bouncing, filled with the end-of-school-year artwork and leftover snacks. Their mother, Sarah, stood at the kitchen sink, peeling potatoes for dinner. She glanced out the window, a smile touching her lips as she saw her sons turn onto their street. She watched them slow their bikes, their heads close together as they talked about some secret boyhood plan. The next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, washing his car with a hose, gave them a friendly wave, which they returned with identical energetic swings of their arms. Sarah turned away from the window for just a moment, no more than a minute, to check the pot roast simmering in the oven. When she looked back, the street was quiet. Mr. Henderson was coiling his hose. The bicycles, both of them, lay on their sides in the grass near the curb, the front wheel of one still spinning slowly, a silent, gleaming red circle against the green. But the boys were gone. The first few minutes were calm, a mother's mild irritation. She called their names from the back porch. Ethan, Alex, supper's almost ready. Her voice was swallowed by the peaceful neighborhood. The silence that answered was unusual, a void where the sound of two energetic boys should have been. Her calm began to curdle into a low, thrumming worry. She walked to the edge of the yard, calling again, her eyes scanning the nearby houses, the familiar bushes, the trees they loved to climb. Nothing. The bicycles, abandoned so carelessly, now looked wrong. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. She called for her husband, David, her voice rising an octave, sharp with a fear she did not yet understand. What followed was a blur of desperate action that slowly smothered the quiet street. Doors were knocked on, yards were searched, and the cheerful sounds of play were replaced by the anxious calls of parents gathering their own children close. The police were called. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in ominous shades of orange and purple, the first official search party was organized. Flashlights cut beams through the gathering dusk, voices calling the twins' names into the woods that bordered the subdivision, their calls echoing back, unanswered. The night grew cold, and the hope that had fueled the search began to fade, replaced by a dawning, horrific realization. Two boys do not simply vanish into thin air. But on Maple Street, that is exactly what had happened. There were no screams, no signs of a struggle, no strange cars reported. Just two bicycles, two abandoned backpacks, and a silence that would come to define the town for decades. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months. The story made the newspapers, then the local news. The national news, for a brief, flashing moment, picked up the haunting tale of the missing twins from the quiet town of Oakwood Falls. The photograph of Ethan and Alex, grinning widely with matching gaps in their front teeth, was printed and reprinted, a ghostly reminder on telephone poles and grocery store bulletin boards. Their parents, Sarah and David, aged years in those first few months, their eyes hollowed out by a grief so profound it seemed to physically shrink them. They gave tearful interviews, pleading for any information, their voices cracking under the weight of a pain no parent should ever have to bear. The investigation stretched on, following countless dead-end leads, questioning drifters, and checking distant sightings that always led to nowhere. The case grew cold, a layer of dust settling over the files, a permanent, aching question mark hanging over Maple Street. 20 years passed. The world moved on, as it always does. The new millennium arrived, bringing with it the internet and cell phones and a different kind of noise. Oakwood Falls grew older, a little faded at the edges, like a photograph left too long in the sun. The houses on Maple Street were now owned by new families, people who knew the story of the Miller twins as a local legend, a tragic piece of neighborhood history to be shared in hushed tones. The old Miller house itself had changed hands several times, a place some considered to be unlucky, marked by sorrow. In the summer of 2005, the latest owners, a young couple named the Robinsons, decided to finally tackle the one part of the house they had been avoiding, the attic. It was a cramped, dusty space, filled with the forgotten detritus of generations. Hot, still air, thick with the smell of old wood and decay, greeted them as they pushed open the creaking hatch. They were up there to install new insulation, a miserable job on a hot day. As Mark Robinson pulled down a brittle roll of old pink fiberglass, his hand brushed against a loose floorboard near the eaves, a place too dark and too narrow to ever really notice. The board shifted with a dry scrape. Curious, he pried it up with the edge of his flashlight, and there it was. Not a forgotten toy or a stack of old books, but a small, metal lockbox, rusted at the corners but still solid. It was heavy for its size, and it was sealed with a small, combination lock that had long since fused shut with rust. He called for his wife, his voice echoing strangely in the silent, dusty space. They carried their find downstairs into the light, the weight of the box feeling far heavier than its physical mass. They did not force it open. Instead, they did the only thing that felt right. They called the police. The discovery of the box sent a low current through the Oakwood Falls Police Department. For the older detectives, it was a jolt from the past, a name from a case file they had never quite been able to close. For the younger ones, it was a story they had heard about in training. Detective Eva Cruz was assigned to the case, a sharp, empathetic woman known for her meticulous work on cold cases. She took possession of the box, handling it with a strange sense of reverence. In the quiet of the evidence room, a technician carefully drilled through the old lock. The lid creaked open, releasing a smell of aged paper and time. Inside, protected from the elements, was a treasure trove of a lost childhood. There were faded Polaroid photographs of two boys building a fort, a collection of smooth river rocks, a few baseball cards. And beneath it all, a stack of papers, letters, written in a careful, looping script that was undoubtedly a woman's. And nestled at the very bottom, a small, marbled-covered composition book, its pages filled with the earnest, blocky handwriting of a child. It was a diary. The name written inside the cover, in pencil, was Alex Miller. Detective Cruz put on a pair of white cotton gloves. She turned to the first page, her heart hammering against her ribs. The story it began to tell was not at all what anyone had expected. It did not speak of a stranger, of a sudden grab, of a moment of fear. Instead, the first entry, dated just a week before the disappearance, began with a sentence that would change everything. Me and Ethan found the most amazing secret today. We promised we would never, ever tell. It's our special place just for us. The diary of Alex Miller became the sole focus of the investigation, a fragile relic from a time everyone had tried to forget. Detective Eva Cruz spent the first night with the box in a quiet, brightly lit room at the precinct, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound. She handled each item with a care that bordered on the sacred, her gloved fingers turning the pages of the composition book as if they might crumble to dust at any moment. The child's handwriting, large and uncertain, told a story that was at once ordinary and deeply strange. The early entries were simple, a chronicle of summer days. Complaints about vegetables at dinner, the triumph of catching a big frog, a detailed drawing of a particularly cool-looking rock. But then, the entries began to change. The tone shifted from a mundane to the secretive, filled with a thrilling, whispered excitement. Ethan says it's the best secret in the whole world. One entry read. Maybe in the whole universe. We have to be careful. We can't let anyone follow us. The secret, it seemed, was a place. Alex's descriptions were those of an 8-year-old, magical and imprecise. He wrote of a castle made of roots and dirt and a door that goes down into the earth. He mentioned a guardian and a treasure that shines. To the adults reading it decades later, it painted a picture of a classic childhood fantasy, an elaborate game of pretend played by two imaginative boys. But Detective Cruz felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't just a game. The sheer frequency of the entries about the secret place, the obsessive detail, the way it consumed their thoughts, it felt more real, more urgent than simple play. They had been visiting this place for days, perhaps weeks, before they vanished. And they had gone to great lengths to ensure they were not seen, describing circuitous routes through backyards and a narrow, hidden path along the creek that bordered the neighborhood. The most haunting entry was the last one, dated the morning of the day they disappeared. The writing was messy, rushed with excitement. We're going back today after school. We have to. We promised the guardian we would bring him the special thing. The one from the big book. Ethan is a little scared, but I'm not. It's going to be the best adventure ever. Detective Cruz read the sentence over and over. We promised the guardian we would bring him the special thing. The word guardian sent a jolt through her. It suggested a person, not a monster from a fantasy, but a person they had met, talked to, made a promise to. And the special thing. What had they taken? She immediately ordered a thorough review of the original evidence logs. Had anything been reported missing from the house? The parents had been asked, of course, in the frantic hours after the disappearance, but their minds had been shattered, unable to focus on such a small detail. The log showed nothing but a small, valuable object, a piece of jewelry, a rare coin, something a child might see as special and a parent might not notice was gone for a few days. The investigation split into two parallel paths, one in the faded present of 2005 and one flashing back to the bright, terrible summer of 1985. In the past, the search for Ethan and Alex had been vast and desperate. Volunteers had combed every inch of the surrounding woods and fields. Drains were checked, ponds were dragged. The police had interviewed every resident on Maple Street and the surrounding blocks. The parents, Sarah and David Miller, were interrogated with a gentle but firm persistence, the awful standard procedure in cases of missing children. They were broken, their world reduced to a single, agonizing question. They could offer no reasons, no enemies, no family disputes. They were a happy, normal family. The only faint ripple in their perfect lives was a mention from a neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, who told police she had sometimes seen the boys sneaking around like little spies near the edge of the woods behind the creek, but she thought nothing of it. It was what boys did. The lead went nowhere, swallowed by the enormity of the tragedy. In the present, Detective Cruz used the diary as a map. She and a team of officers retraced the routes Alex described. The neighborhood had changed. New fences had been built, trees had grown or been cut down. But the creek was still there, and the general layout of the land was the same. They followed the path Alex had detailed, pushing through overgrown thickets, their boots sinking into the soft mud of the creek bank. And then, one of the younger officers, keen-eyed and eager, pointed it out. Almost completely hidden by a fallen log and a thick curtain of ivy was an old drainage pipe, large enough for a child to walk into. It was made of crumbling concrete, and it seemed to lead into the side of a small, wooded ravine. This was it, the door that goes down into the earth. Cruz's heart beat a hard, steady rhythm against her chest. She ordered the area sealed off. They would need lights, proper equipment, and an evidence team. Whatever was in that pipe had been waiting for 20 years. The discovery sent a new, electric wave of pain through the Miller family. Sarah and David, now in their late 50s, their faces permanently etched with the grief of 2 decades, were brought into the station. Detective Cruz showed them the diary. Seeing their son's handwriting so vibrant and alive on the page was a physical blow to them. Sarah wept silently, her fingers hovering over the paper, unable to touch it. David's face was a mask of stunned confusion as he read about the secret world his sons had inhabited right under his nose. They were asked about this special thing. They were asked about a guardian. The terms meant nothing to them. They were asked if the boys had ever mentioned a friend, an older person, maybe someone who gave them candy or showed them interesting things. They shook their heads, lost. Their sons had been normal, popular boys. They talked about school friends, about baseball. They never mentioned a secret adult friend. It was a dead end that felt like a new beginning of agony. The diary had given them a devastating gift. A window into their son's last days, a window that only showed a deeper, more confusing mystery. They had not been taken. They had gone willingly, excitedly, into the earth, and they had never come back. The drainage pipe, once a hidden gateway to childhood adventure, was now a grim, official crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off a wide area around the ravine, creating a jarring splash of modern color against the decaying greens and browns of the woods. A generator hummed nearby, powering a set of brilliant halogen lights that flooded the pipe's dark mouth, chasing away 2 decades of shadows. The air, once filled with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, was now thick with the serious, quiet murmurs of the evidence recovery team. Detective Cruz stood at the entrance, her silhouette sharp against the artificial light. She pulled on a fresh pair of gloves, the snap of the latex loud in the tense silence. This was no longer about a missing persons case. It was an archaeological dig into a moment frozen in time. The team moved with a slow, painstaking precision. The pipe was not long, perhaps 10 feet, but it opened into a small, man-made chamber, part of an old, forgotten storm drain system from when the neighborhood was first built. The space was low and cramped, forcing the technicians to kneel or crouch. The beam of a flashlight swept across the earthen floor, and almost immediately, it illuminated what they were looking for. Not bones, not a body, but the artifacts of a life interrupted. A small, rusted flashlight, its lens cracked. A few wax paper wrappers that had once held peanut butter sandwiches. A worn copy of a Hardy Boys book, its pages swelled and fused together by dampness. And then, something more personal, a single, small, red sneaker caked in dry mud. It was a size that spoke of an 8-year-old boy. The items were carefully photographed, tagged, and placed into evidence bags, each one a silent, heartbreaking testament to the twins' secret world. But the most significant find was not on the ground. One of the technicians, brushing away a thick layer of dirt and cobwebs from the curved wall of the chamber, exposed something else. Crude drawings, etched into the concrete with a rock or a stick. There were stick figures of 2 boys, their hands linked. A lopsided sun, and beside them, a larger, clumsily drawn figure with a kind smile. The word friend was carved in shaky letters next to it. Below the drawings was a series of deeper gouges, a tally mark count that seemed to track days. There were 7 marks. The boys had been coming here for a week. This was their castle. This was their guardian. The larger figure wasn't a monster. It was a person they liked, someone they considered a friend. The discovery sent a new, complicated wave of dread through the team. This wasn't an abduction by a stranger in the classical, frightening sense. This was a relationship, a trust built, and that made the mystery even more unsettling. The investigation now had a new, urgent focus: identify the guardian. Detective Cruz returned to the diary, scouring every entry for clues. Alex's writing was filled with the innocent awe of a child, but it offered few concrete details. The guardian knew all the best secrets. He showed them shiny things from under the ground. He was old and nice and has a quiet voice. He lived where the trees are biggest, which to a child could mean anywhere. The police work began again, this time with a specific target. They pulled old property records, cross-referenced them with known sex offenders from that era, a grim but necessary task, but came up empty. They looked for any local oddballs, hermits, or recluses who lived on the edge of town in 1985. The list was short, and every lead was followed with a grim determination. The break came from an unexpected place. An elderly evidence clerk, who had been a young patrolman during the initial search, was reviewing the old case files for any misconnections. He remembered a small, almost forgotten detail. During the massive ground search on the second day, his team had canvassed a dilapidated old cottage at the very end of an overgrown lane, deep in the woods a mile from the creek. The resident was an old man, a recluse named Arthur Peabody. He was quiet, a little confused, but had willingly let them search his small, cluttered home. They found nothing, and he had been dismissed as irrelevant. But the clerk remembered the man's hands, stained with dirt, and the shelves in his shack filled with interesting rocks and bits of colored glass. He remembered it because his own son collected rocks. He mentioned it to Detective Cruz. He was a harmless old bird, the clerk said, a rockhound, loved poking around creek beds and old dig sites. Kids probably would have found him fascinating. Detective Cruz and her partner drove out to the cottage. The lane was even more overgrown than it had been 20 years prior, barely a path. The cottage itself seemed to sag under the weight of time, its roof mossy, its windows dark. Arthur Peabody still lived there. He was now in his late 80s, a frail man with watery blue eyes and hands gnarled by arthritis. He was hesitant at first, suspicious of the police at his door again. But Cruz spoke softly, showing him a photocopy of the drawing from the drain chamber, the one that said friend. The old man's eyes welled with tears. He invited them in. His home was a museum of natural history, filled with fossils, geodes, arrowheads, and neatly labeled boxes of minerals. He confirmed it. He had known Ethan and Alex. He'd met them by the creek a few weeks before they vanished. He was the guardian. He told them stories about the rocks, showed them his collection. They were bright, curious boys. He enjoyed their company. He admitted he had shown them the drain pipe, a place he himself had used for shelter years before. It was their secret, but he swore, his voice trembling with a sincerity that was painful to hear, that he had nothing to do with their disappearance. The last time he saw them was 2 days before they went missing. They had promised to bring him a magic rock from their father's study, a small piece of hematite they were convinced was a meteorite. He never saw them again. He had been terrified to come forward in 1985, afraid he would be blamed. So he had kept his secret, living with the guilt and the fear for 20 long years. He had no idea where they were. The story checked out. His alibi for that afternoon was confirmed by a long-dead neighbor who remembered seeing him tending his garden. Arthur Peabody was not a predator. He was just a lonely old man who had made 2 friends and then lost them to a mystery that consumed him, too. The one solid lead had dissolved, leaving them with a new, profound sadness and the same old, empty silence. The boys had been on their way to see their friend. They had never arrived. The police station in Oakwood Falls felt like a tomb holding 2 decades of unanswered questions. The revelation that Arthur Peabody was the boys' guardian sent a final, devastating tremor through the investigation before it settled into a profound and permanent silence. He was not a monster. He was a sad, lonely old man whose greatest sin was being afraid. He was eliminated as a suspect, his story corroborated, and his innocence a painful dead end. The drain pipe had given up all its secrets, and they led nowhere. The diary's trail had gone cold. The special thing they were bringing, the hematite rock, was found weeks after the disappearance, fallen behind a bookshelf in David Miller's study. It had never even left the house. The final, hopeful door had slammed shut. The case of Ethan and Alex Miller was officially and forever closed. The town, which had held its breath for 20 years, finally had to exhale, the air leaving in a long, weary sigh of unresolved grief. For Sarah and David Miller, the official closure was a peculiar and hollow kind of agony. There was no body to bury, no grave to visit, no definitive answer upon which to hang their grief. They were left with a collection of heartbreaking details that painted a picture but provided no ending. They knew their sons had a wonderful secret. They knew they were happy, excited on their last day. They knew they were loved. But the central, crushing question remained. Where did they go? The not knowing was a phantom limb, an ache that would never fade. They decided to leave Oakwood Falls, the memories in every blade of grass, every sound of a child's laughter, becoming too sharp to bear. They packed up the few belongings they had kept from the old house, including the now famous diary and the contents of the metal box. They held a small, private memorial service in a church, the two of them alone in the pews, mourning not the death of their children, but the loss of them, a distinction that was both subtle and immense. On the morning they were to drive away for the last time, Sarah felt a compulsive need to do one final thing. She asked David to drive her to the ravine. The police tape was gone, the equipment hauled away. Nature was already reclaiming the spot. Early autumn, leaves beginning to scatter across the entrance to the drain pipe. It was just a hole in the ground again. David waited by the car, his head bowed, as Sarah walked slowly to the pipe's opening. She didn't go inside. Instead, she knelt on the damp earth, her knees sinking into the soft soil. She had brought something with her. From her pocket, she took the small, rusted flashlight that had been found inside. The technicians had processed it and, seeing its emotional value more than its evidential worth, had allowed the Millers to keep it. She also took the two small, smooth river rocks from the metal box, the ones Alex had so carefully saved. One by one, she pushed them deep into the earth, right at the threshold of the pipe, a tiny, private burial of the artifacts. This was their place. This was where they were last truly happy. It felt right to leave a piece of them here. As her fingers worked the cool soil, her nail caught on something hard and flat, something that wasn't a root or a stone. Curious, she dug around it, pulling it free. It was a small, rectangular piece of blackened metal, about the size of a postage stamp. It was filthy, but when she rubbed it clean on her jeans, a faint, intricate design became visible, a tiny, engraved flower. Her breath caught in her throat. It was familiar. It was part of a locket. Her locket. A cheap, tin thing she had owned as a young woman, long before the boys were born. She had kept it in her jewelry box, a forgotten trinket. The boys, especially Alex, had always been fascinated by it, by the secret compartment inside. She had often found them playing with it. She stared at the fragment in her palm, her mind racing, trying to connect it to this place. Why was it here? Had they taken it? Was this the special thing they meant to bring? The diary had mentioned the one from the big book, but a child's description could mean anything. A jewelry box could be a book of treasures. This changed nothing for the police, she knew. A lost piece of a locket proved nothing. But for her, it was a message. A final, whispered secret from her sons. They had been here. They had held a piece of her with them. They had planned to trade it for a magic rock. The simplicity of it, the pure, childish logic, was so utterly heartbreaking and beautiful that she began to weep, not tears of despair, but of a strange, painful love. She stayed there for a long time, the fragment clutched tightly in her hand. She looked past the drain pipe, her eyes tracing the path her boys would have taken from their home. She imagined them running, laughing, full of their secret mission. Her gaze followed the creek bank, up the slight incline, through the trees. And then she saw it, not with her eyes, but with her heart. A truth so simple, so obvious, and so terrible that it had been invisible for 20 years. The drain pipe was not the destination. It was the meeting point. Arthur Peabody's cottage was in the opposite direction. If they were coming from home, going to see him, the pipe was directly on the way. But if they weren't going to see him that day, if they were going somewhere else, the diary said they had promised the guardian they would bring the special thing. It didn't say they were taking it to him. It just said they had to bring it. The destination was somewhere else. Her eyes lifted, looking beyond the ravine, to where the land dipped down towards the deeper, faster-moving river that eventually joined the creek. The river that had been swollen with rain the week they vanished. The river that had been searched, but perhaps not carefully enough right here in this specific spot, obscured by the ravine. The pieces did not click together with a sound. They settled with a dreadful, silent finality. She knew. She would never say it out loud. She would never tell David, or the police, or anyone. Some truths are too heavy to speak. She knew they had never left these woods. They had simply stumbled. They had fallen. They had been quietly and completely claimed by the earth and the water they loved to explore. Their adventure had ended in the very heart of their secret world. There was no villain, no grand conspiracy, only a tragic accident hidden by the landscape and the relentless passage of time. Sarah Miller stood up, her body aching. She placed the metal fragment back into the earth, covering it gently. She turned and walked back to the car, to her husband, to the rest of her life. She took the mystery with her, a sacred and terrible knowledge that finally, after 20 years, allowed her to stop searching and simply remember the two bright boys on their red bicycles, forever riding into the golden light of summer afternoon.